Hi, everybody. Thanks a million for tuning in today. I'm so delighted to be joined by Jen Martin from Author. Jen, thanks a million for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So Jen's going to look at, a series of topics and kind of hopefully some tips and suggestions from a wide array of experience that she's been through herself. And Jen will go through some slides as a slightly different format to our presentation flow from today. At Blossom for Life, we just do one-to-one tuition and online tuition for people with learning difficulties. And Jen has an awful lot of experience with lots of different age categories and worked with so many people in the education space. So hopefully this will be of some bit of help for people tuning in and parents and teachers across the globe today. Perfect, Jen. So maybe just give us a bit of an outline to kind of your background and just give us a brief introduction before we kick things off.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jen Martin. I'm the director of a company called Author, which I'm going to introduce in a moment anyway. So I'll show you that on slides. And I suppose my qualification, I'm a psychological coach, which means I coach people to optimize performance and a whole host of things. Really, people leverage coaching really for lots of different reasons. So yeah, psychological coaching is the core of what I'm about, and I like to bring that to Author and the teaching training style that we have. So hopefully it'll all make sense when I share.
Yeah, perfect. Well, pens and notes and papers at the ready.
Perfect. I'll share the screen and you can let me know if it is clear.
Perfect.
All good.
Yeah, great.
Perfect. Great. And yeah, so I'm just going to talk you through a little bit about Author. So as I said, Author is the name of the company that I run. And I'll introduce what we do in just a moment. But the format really for the talk that I have today is to tell you what it is that we do exactly, how we do it, and how we do it differently to other people who are in our field, in our space, in the industry. And what I want to linger on, I suppose, to provide the most value for the people listening today is why. Why is it that, why do we do what we do? And some of the lessons learned along the way.
Fabulous.
So a little bit first about our approach. So we support non-native English speakers, primarily professionals and people in the workplace. And on the surface, that can look like English teaching or English training, business English. But the reason that we do it is really to help people innovate with ease, to communicate their ideas, all of the points here that are mentioned on the screen. And it's really about allowing people to bring their whole selves to work. If you feel that you have a disadvantage, it's very hard to be able to do these things. It's very hard to speak up and contribute your ideas. So on the surface, what may look like language or English training really goes beyond that. Okay.
And so vital, I suppose, Jen, really, because, so many nationals and people coming from all over the globe now and working in, English speaking multinational companies and that side of things, such a valuable tool.
Exactly. That's it. Like, as this slide here says, the problem, like 70%, when I came across this stat, I was absolutely floored by it. 70% of non-native English speakers report not having mastery of the language skills needed to do their job. So on the surface, again, an absolutely incredible statistic. Yeah. But when you think about the implications of that, as the slide also says there, like self-confidence erodes, job security falters, performance suffers, inclusion is impacted. And this is obviously in related to language skills and English in particular, but we could really apply this across the board to other challenges or additional challenges that people may have.
Yeah.
So I think it's a relevant, obviously the statistic may vary from person to person, from industry, depending on the challenge or the disability that's in question. But I think the message rings true. What is the impact of the statistic? What are we losing out on by not addressing problems like this?
Completely, definitely.
People are always surprised when I allude to the fact that we consider ourselves working in the inclusion space, and they would say, but it's English teaching or it's English training. But actually for us, it's really very much so about diversity and inclusion. Also, yes, it is about equipping people with skills, and yes, it is about training people. But it goes beyond that. The quote there that I've highlighted in the gray color, for me, I've seen this in so many different places. I don't know the original source, it's not mine, and I think many people have said it, but I think privilege is not the presence of advantage, it's the absence of barriers. This is really what we are all about at our core. It's how can we help to remove barriers that are blocking people from thriving, succeeding, whatever their definition of success is. It's not for us to define their definition of success. So yeah, diversity and inclusion, probably one of the things that surprise people most, but really, really part of our mission. So how do we do that, or what are the pillars? So for us, the values at Author are these values here that you see in front of you: authenticity, authority, and authorship. And obviously you can see that's where we got our name. So we actually started with that. We started with the values first, and that's how the name came about, because people do always ask about the name. It's quite unusual.
I love all the A's, from a dyslexic perspective. It's, it has a different acronym level. You could just call it A.
Yeah, there's that too. Absolutely. So for us, when we started, like at the drawing board, kind of thinking about what's the name that we want to have to represent the activity that we do, it was, well, what are we bringing to the table? Like, what are we bringing as the teachers, the trainers, the coaches? But also, what are we empowering and equipping people to bring to their communication? So our philosophy is really authenticity is we work in the communication space. So authenticity is absolutely everything that you can be and bring your whole self to whatever the situation is. And authority then builds on that. If you feel that you can be your true self, your real self, you're not masking, you're not hiding, then you have authority over the communication that you have, and you have authority over the message that you want to communicate. And authority, I think, can often be seen as, sometimes it can be portrayed in a negative light. But really for us, it's about actually ownership, like owning the space that you're in and your communication. So that's authority. And then authorship again builds on that. Authorship for us is about sharing. So being yourself, owning your message, and then sharing your message in whatever form that is, whatever form your message or your communication takes. As I said,
that's so impactful, Jen, for everybody, regardless of their language or background or any of those things, having
absolutely.
the, authenticity to feel comfortable with being themselves and standing in their own skin. And, we have an awful lot of that, obviously, with people with learning difficulties of not feeling that and being able to do that. An authority piece is massive, when in school dynamic or in any, workplaces, as you mentioned, just having that kind of, drive to just actually stand up for yourself a bit more. And yes, as you said, sometimes seen as probably not a majorly positive thing, but you're only neglecting yourself then if you don't do it. So it's kind of it's a very trade-off viewpoint, really.
That's it. Like, these are obviously the values we bring to Author, and our client tends to be the non-native English speaker, but my work beyond Author as a psychological coach extends beyond just language. So for me, these words, these pillars, they ring true for so many different situations, whether it's a language skill that you're looking to build or something completely different. I think the pillars can still apply. So that's kind of what we bring, and how we do that then. And again, I think this can ring true for the conversation we're having today around disability as well, is typically in our industry, now I can't speak for every industry, of course, but typically what we see in the English training industry is that it's very much a skills-based approach. I mean, obviously, it goes without saying that is imperative. You have to equip people with the skills to speak the language. Our approach is really, okay, how can we take that and how can we look at the whole person, the whole picture, and ensure that they feel equipped on every level. So it's, yes, bringing those English skills. So that might be the grammar, that might be the vocabulary, that might be whatever skill you need in the language. But also then, because we work with business professionals, looking at communication and soft skills. So that might be owning presentation skills, or it might be how you negotiate or how you lead a meeting, whatever it might be. And then I think fundamentally is what's below the surface. And I think this might resonate with you as well, Una, the idea that you can equip people with skills, you can impart knowledge, but ultimately it's about bringing that psychological approach and
Massive.
helping people feel that they can. So that's coming back to
Completely.
confidence and
Massive.
limiting beliefs that you might have. So does that resonate with you?
Yeah, completely. I suppose that, you can teach anybody anything really at the end of the day if they're open-minded enough, or if they're, determined and willing to go along with it. It's the barriers or the society lens that they put on their own side.
Yes.
So I can't really do that, or,
Yeah.
I shouldn't really do that because somebody said to me in school that I wasn't really good at that. And those viewpoints that we take on from has a massive impact obviously on our learning and development. But generally I completely agree with you, like that anybody is, I believe, is capable of doing anything that they want to do with the right tools and the right strategies to do it. But we stop ourselves, unfortunately, from doing that, or we take on other people's opinions a bit too much.
That's it. We're all the products of our environment, so we know from social learning theory, we know from social conditioning that we are flooded with these messages all the time, whether they are explicit from things that people have said, as you said, but also there's covert messaging that we have all the time in society, and we take all this on. And certainly what I see with clients that I work with, those limiting beliefs, how they can get in the way. And as I said, obviously we work with non-native English speakers. What that can sound like is, but who am I to share my idea? Or I might not be good enough to speak up in that situation. And they have these beliefs about their communication, but actually it can go quite deeper. So that's our approach. And as you can imagine, this is why it's important, because you can give those skills, but unless you're equipped and feel confident to actually use them, this is the next slide. This is what's the alternative. So for us, it's not just pouring, giving that soup recipe, but giving the soup recipe and ensuring that the pot is sealed so that it doesn't all seep out. It's making sure that the skills go in, but that the container is secure enough to use it.
There's a fabulous analogy about so many, I can't remember now who. Oprah does a good stint though on her cup being full and running over and those types of things. But there's a quite detailed one about buckets, but I'll kind of briefly look at it. But obviously just not having that many holes, so the water obviously goes through if there's loads of holes, and the holes could be other people's opinions or past experiences, their traumas. And hopefully the aim is for all of us that we try and fill the holes in the bucket so that we can, fill up and replenish ourselves, because we can't really give back to others and help others if we don't have our own full bucket, I think was the gist of it.
No, that's absolutely it. It's your bucket can only spill over and help others if your bucket is full, but your bucket will never be full unless it starts with you first. So that's very much our approach is, okay, we can give you all the water, the skills, but ultimately, first and foremost, it has to be, let's see what holes there are there, and can we patch them up and make sure that bucket is secure. So it's a little visual to communicate what we do. So on the whole, I won't go through all this. It's really just about the whole person. It's not just looking at a skills-based approach, but looking at that iceberg and making sure that our clients feel empowered beyond their equipment. So what I want to do now is really, I think this might be a nice, interesting discussion for us to have, is to look at some of the experiences that have brought this philosophy to life.
Jen, that's a lot of companies, God almighty.
Well, there's lots of different teaching contexts, and I'm going to share them now. And what I thought,
feel a bit imposter syndrome there now with that.
Not at all. So, like, I've worked with lots of people over the years through different contexts, and it'll make sense now when I show you the context in which I've happened to work with those people. So yeah, I thought we could look at some lessons learned and what the different contexts have taught me, and I think that's probably where we linger the most. So I've worked in different teaching settings over the years, and I was thinking in preparation for today's chat that what are the key things that I took from those teaching contexts? And there are so many. Obviously, there was 10 lessons for every teaching context, but I just wanted to pull out kind of key things that really resonated with me from these teaching contexts. So the first one up there on the top left is I worked in a specialist medical school in France. And at the time that I worked there, it was the only school of its kind in France. And it was for
Wow.
children who have severe epilepsy. And, you know, what was interesting about that school is they had a primary school and they had a secondary school on the same site. And because it's the only one in France, or it was at the time, it's probably a good decade ago now, the children used to fly in from all over the country.
Wow.
And they used to live on this little campus. And on this little campus, there was the primary school, the secondary school, there was a little hospital, very small little hospital, and there was their sleeping quarters, like their dorms or their little houses. And that was my first teaching job. And it was, I don't think I'll ever work in such a unique context again. And it was absolutely wonderful, terrifying at the start because I didn't have the skills. It was empowering. It was honestly, it was a dream. I absolutely cherished working there.
Wow.
The children that I worked with I worked with both primary and secondary school students. It is not an exaggeration to say an inspiration because of the challenges, the additional challenges that they faced.
Massive.
And while all of them suffered from severe epilepsy, a lot of them had additional learning challenges, learning needs, and a lot of other syndromes. And so there was a lot of different medical needs as well as epilepsy. In that context, you could walk into the classroom and 3 people could have a seizure or more, you know, at any given time. And you had to learn to recognize different people's epileptic signs and signals. So for example, I might know Patrick, it's always his left arm that moves, or Mary, it's always her left leg, etc., etc. And what we had to do was we had to make notes for the medical staff. You know, Patrick had a seizure today, it started at this time, ended at this time. You know, did he have foam? Did he foam with the mouth or not? His limbs, etc. Did they move? So we had to make these detailed notes for the medical staff. So the key, honestly, I could probably dedicate an hour to talking about the lessons learned here, but I just thought from a teaching perspective, from a human perspective, I think there's a book. But from a teaching perspective, that job taught me the importance of repetition. Why? Well, most of the students in this school suffered their epileptic fits predominantly at night. And we were shown the videos of them having as part of our training. And what I learned at that time was your brain works, your brain records, its memory function really works while you sleep. That's why sleep is so important. And I remember learning, well, you should always study before you go to bed rather than when you wake up in the morning before an exam, because if you study before you go to bed or before you sleep, your memory will work at nighttime and retain the information.
Oh, that's a proper, that's a Leaving Cert hit there, Jen, to everybody that's preparing for exams.
God. It's so true, because I mean, when I was in college, definitely you'd kind of weigh up, will I study tonight late, you know, into the night and go to sleep and then wake up, or will I go to bed and wake up in the morning and study before the exam? The lesson learned for me in this school was always study before sleep, because your memory works at night. However, because these amazing children were suffering the majority of their epileptic fits or seizures at nighttime, it wasn't an exaggeration from my teaching staff, my colleagues, to tell me their memory has been wiped. I couldn't fathom this, but I could see it. And so with time I saw, wow, I suppose I didn't understand initially why my colleagues would repeat lessons over and over. And it made me realize these children had to work so harder to retain the information that they'd learned the day before would have to be repeated. So repetition really was hammered home to me in this school, amongst, as you can imagine, so many different other learnings.
And I'm sure their exhaustion rate then as well, Jen, is probably so dramatic. You know, they'll affect their concentration. So as you know, obviously sleep and food are integral to us learning and concentrating for set hours of the day that they have to do in school.
Unbelievably so.
With that interrupting their sleep pattern, they must be completely
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the exhaustion from the lack of a steady night's sleep, but also
Completely.
the exhaustion if they had a seizure during class. You
Yeah.
could see that they would just put their head down and say, I need to have a nap, because they were just completely wiped out. So
Gosh.
it was a really, really unique teaching experience. And I'm so glad that I was able to experience it and meet amazing people. And
Wow.
honestly, it was humbling, really, really humbling.
I'm sure it puts an awful lot of our own, day-to-day minor things into perspective when you have,
Oh, wow.
kids battling with such
Yeah,
difficult circumstances as well.
exactly. Oh, it really, really did. And also, probably sounds a little bit dramatic to say it, but I mean it sincerely. Also made me realize the privilege I had in not having that challenge, because
Completely.
they had to work so much harder to
Yeah.
learn and retain that information, because at the same time I was also working in another school that was a standard high school, which I'll talk about in a moment.
Yeah.
But these children really wanted to learn. They didn't take it for granted, and they had to work twice as hard, if not more. So it really did kind of highlight the concept of privilege to me early on. And I'm glad for that. That was an important life lesson, I think. So that was that school. Again, we could spend an hour talking about that, I imagine. But just to kind of pop through some of the other teaching experiences, up there on the right hand, on the top, the college and the lycée that I worked in France. This was in tandem, so I worked in two different schools at the same time on different days. And it was in the same town, actually, but obviously completely different teaching experiences. So this was a regular mainstream school, college and lycée, so working with children aged 12 up to our equivalent of Leaving Cert, so 18. And I write fun here. There was lots of learnings, but because these are some of my first teaching experiences, I realized the value of having fun in the classroom. I think because I had a preconceived notion of what a teacher should be. I think I was going into it being very serious and doing what I think, I should, or being how I thought I should be as a teacher. And actually what I realized was the value of bringing fun into the classroom. And though I worked with those children from 12 to 18, that same learning is relevant from today with the adults that I work with. We are human, we value fun. So it's not just about the fact that these are children who need to have fun. I probably bring the same spirit to working with adults today that I learned then.
Fabulous. Yeah, that's cool, Jen.
Yeah, so fun. And the next thing was a summer camp in Belgium. This was for, I suppose you could call it, I don't know if luxury is the right word, but it was kind of, a summer camp for children. Again, the age was, I think, 8 up to 18. My first kind of camp experience. I hadn't worked in a camp before. This was throughout university. And that what hammered it home to me there was the value of preparation. And, it seems so obvious to say, but actually knowing the needs, by preparation I mean, what do these students really need, and how can I best equip myself to bring to meet their needs in the lesson. So preparation was really, again, it seems an obvious thing, but it was such an acute learning in that context, because it was a camp. We had children from Russia, France, all over the world, with very, very different learning needs. And so taking the time in advance of the lessons to say, okay, what are all the different needs that need to be met here? And how can I prepare to do that?
Fascinating, I suppose, with everybody with their own niche areas and their own interests, particularly then for young kids that wanted to go off and, do other things then as well in some of the summer camps.
Some of them probably didn't want to be there. Some of them loved learning. So it was really taking that time to, how can I engage all of the people? How can I engage all of my students when they come from totally different cultural contexts, when they have totally different wants, totally different needs? So the value of preparation cannot be underestimated in that context, especially because if you didn't take the time to do that preparation, all was lost. Destroy you. Yeah. All was lost in such a varied teaching context. So that was an interesting learning. I'll move quickly on and jump in at any stage. The next was a private school in Hong Kong. And here I was working with very, very young learners. The youngest I ever worked with, I was working with 3 and 4 year olds, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. And it's a funny one to have on the slide, rules and structure. Even as I wrote that, I thought, oh, that probably sounds a little bit boring. But actually, it really emphasized to me how much children value having a really, really clear structure. And I don't want to say me being very strict. I'm not sure that's the right word, but me being very consistent in implementing the rules of the classroom, and obviously bringing the fun, obviously bringing the preparation, the repetition, all of the other learning still stand true. But actually this teaching context in particular showed me these children thrive on my consistency. They thrive on me bringing the same rules every day, bringing the same temperament every day, obviously sometimes being spontaneous with different things, but that really became evident. And obviously that changes a little bit working with adults. The rules are not quite the same. But actually, I would say still today, working with adults, structure is so important, and people like to know where they stand. So
huge, yeah. I suppose lots of people's structures gone out the window with the latest, pandemic situation of people's structure and routine and consistency.
Exactly.
All of those things have been put into question an awful lot more.
Yeah. So not just in a learning context as well.
Totally. Yeah.
Routine as well. We could put in there as well, the rules, the routine, the structure. Another context was working in a private after-school club. I'm not sure if club was the right word to use here, but this was essentially I'm not sure if you're familiar with teaching contexts in Korea, Japan, Taiwan. Obviously, I can't, make a huge generalization like that, but this is not so much club after school, but it was more a second school. So the children go to the regular school. So by regular, I mean, the state school system. And they often then are picked up from state school, and then they go to an after school club, in inverted commas, which is really just a second school. And it's just a second round of school.
And how long would they stay in that second school for then, Jen?
Yeah, so I remember one of the girls, she was my last, I did some group and I did one-to-one work there. And my last little girl every day was 9 o'clock at night. And she was about 7 or 8, I'd say.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So what that teaching context taught me above all else is the importance of empathy. Like empathy is, I would say, something that comes naturally to me anyway, but just seeing how hard these children work, and being able to empathize with their situation. It was really, really emphasized to me in this teaching context. They work.
It shows the value, I suppose, in the role, the of importance placed then on the parents to have, set things up in that manner and works for some kids, and others, that in more of a balance and a, childlike approach to their childhood.
Absolutely
is needed as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for me to critique necessarily any system. That's not my own, and I obviously my experience there was was limited. It was a few months, but I just could really empathize with how hard these children worked, and again bringing that fun was probably really important alongside the empathy. Looking at the fact that this child has worked all day long and is so little, so I can empathize there and bring that fun and make sure that we can make it as you said, as childlike as possible, and satisfying obviously the needs of their schooling as well. So that was a really unique experience as well. And then the last one was a business school, again, a business language school in Belgium. And really, authenticity really just shone through there. So this was a really unique teaching context. And you saw a lot of the companies there before. And I would have met those, the staff of those companies coming for training predominantly in this teaching context, but also working for myself. And what's interesting there is, you're working with people who might be diplomats or who might be ministers of a government, or someone who's very senior in an organization. And on the surface, you might think, oh my God, I'm working with this person, or you might be nervous, but actually what really showed, what I really learned there was actually they're human, and they want another human, and they don't want to be treated, they don't want special treatment, and just the value of being yourself, having fun, and bringing all of your normal personality to that teaching context, irrespective of the fact that this is a VIP or anything like that. Actually, is quite the opposite. Is just bringing your real self to that teaching context, and that's how you really got the most from clients. Actually, if I was to bring that approach rather than bringing a VIP approach, or treating someone differently,
And I suppose lessons in all of those, Jen, from every context, for every teaching discipline, or every educational aspect of the repetition and the fun, and there's so many key messages in there that can apply to maybe teachers linking in, or even parents. Obviously the homeschooling isn't as existent anymore, but some are obviously preparing now for state exams, end of year school exams, or secondary and for Leaving Cert side of things. So there's elements in there that I suppose we can take, as well as adults and as of kind of people working in the teaching space, that need to be implemented regardless of background and language and culture.
Absolutely. I think these lessons learned, I just kind of kept it top level in terms of the key standout lessons, no matter how simple. And I think it doesn't matter if we apply these, it doesn't have to be teaching context even. I think definitely. As even for leadership, how can I bring empathy and fun to my workplace, etc. It doesn't have to be a teaching context, nor does it have to be a language or intercultural context either. So I thought these just a few learnings to share with you today, and and I just said, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask.
So I suppose what we might do, Jen, is we might put a link down below into the video if people kind of want to reach out to Jen, or ask any other questions, or have any things that they want to follow up on, or to work with Jen a bit more in this space, if they have any areas that they need developing and looking into a bit more. But Jen, it's so great to have such a array of an experience and lots of different backgrounds. Definitely a very well lived and flourished life that you've had so far. Who knew you had that much of a background?
We're so lucky that we have so many opportunities, particularly there's some professions like teaching that afford you the opportunity to work in different contexts. So my 20s were were really interesting. So lots of lovely experiences and lessons learned.
Oh, well, it's great, and thank you for sharing those with us. It's definitely very intuitive and very welcoming from that side, to have somebody that has a different background and wealth of experience, but then still things that can apply to everybody. There's a very open-ended aspect to that things from anybody from any walk of life or age demographic can take lessons and take value in those things that you have learned and instilled in different contexts, and things that hopefully we can take on board and maybe notice. So as people go through their day or go through their week, they can see, is that kind of having empathy towards other people, or is that kind of me being authentic in a workplace or in school, or when you're teaching, is that actually me being somewhat true to myself in doing that, and really valuable take homes really in that, Jen.
Thank you. That's great. And I think that's it, isn't it? It's just, how can I take these learnings that we all have and apply them across the board, not just in the context in which you found them. Perfect. So obviously these are learnings for the classroom that I had, but I'd like to think that I brought them into other areas of my life too. So
great.
So yeah.
No, that's perfect, Jen. Thanks so much for joining us today, and thank everybody for kind of tuning in and watching the bits of Jen's key takeaways and key take-homes. Again, we'll put a link in to contact Jen, or any follow-ups, or an email address if anybody wants to link in with Jen going forward. If people want to reach out about further video suggestions or further topics that they'd like us to look at, feel free as well to drop us a message and we will follow up on that with you. But thanks a million and have a great day.